Their seats. What's that? It's on. I'm pretty sure it's on. And you've got the clicker? Awesome. Great. There's lots of seats kind of up here at the front too. If people are looking for seats, there's some over here. That's like room for some neighbors. All right, awesome. So we are going to try to keep things on time tonight. So we're going to get started. To start off our evening, I would like to invite Chief Janice George, Squamish Hereditary Chief, to the podium. Thank you, Janet.
Tinoyap and Sequatos. I is chop Tinoyap. I is chop Tinoyap. I is chop Tinoyap. Japchemi is yam kushamensna. Tanachant las nak is gehopmish uchmeuch. Anwanacht and following. Good evening, everyone. Peace to every one of you here this evening. Peace to every one of you. I come here as a respectful person. My ancestral name is Japchemia Siam, and my hereditary chieftainship for my father's side of the family, the George family, comes from Sanok, which is now called False Creek. I'm really honored to be here, but more than that, I'm really honored that all of you are here and for this important discussion, and one that is close to all of our hearts, but one that we need to continue our lives and continue our grandchildren's and their grandchildren's lives in the quality that we hope that they can live in, that we enjoy today. So, it's so important to hear the plans that our candidates have for this beautiful land that we all live on. So welcome here, and I'm really, really happy to see you all here. Osium. Good luck to all the candidates.
Thank you, Chief Janice George, for starting the evening off in such a good way. And of course, thanks to you, Buddy, who always comes along and supports us. It's an honor to have you both with us, and thank you. We'll talk soon. Be safe. Thank you. So as we go into our conversation tonight, I am thinking about the Indigenous people of Canada and how they've been on the front lines fighting for the environment for many decades now and at a great cost, and how important it is for those of us that are guests on this land to learn to be better listeners. So, and to that, I'm pleased to see so many of you here tonight. I'm Janet Weber. I'm the Executive Director of SFU Public Square. We're a community engagement initiative of Simon Fraser University. We partner with community members, staff, students, faculty to convene dozens of events like this each year, at which we bring people together to learn with each other and co-create solutions to the pressing issues of our time. Tonight is a perfect example of the type of partnership work that we do. For this event, we partnered with Stacey Artlew, an engaged citizen and a constituent of Vancouver Centre, who actually brought the idea of doing this debate to us, this 100 debates on the environment, and did a ton of the groundwork. So I just wanted to thank you, Stacey, for everything that you have done to bring us where we are today. So this event is a chance for you to hear directly from the candidates in your riding on what they plan to do to protect our environment and address the climate emergency. This is one of over 120 politically neutral debates on the environment happening all across Canada tonight. Each one is organized by individuals and organizations from within the community to bring the environment and climate change to the top of the political discussion. By creating a forum to hear directly from candidates for Vancouver Centre, we citizens will be able to hold future MPs accountable for their commitments and encourage meaningful action towards a more sustainable future. Speaking of being engaged citizens, we do have a vote pop-up here tonight, which has been put together by the Democratic Engagement Exchange from Ryerson University. Basically what this is a simulated polling station where you can get a chance to engage with a ballot box, voting screens, and sample ballots ahead of the election. The idea there is to demystify the voting process for first-time and infrequent voters. It also connects people's concerns and hopes to the election and build a culture of engagement, which is vital for our healthy democracy. So our hashtags tonight are hashtag 100 debates, hashtag ELXN43, at SFU Public Square, and at SFU Sustain. And with that, I think we're going to get on with the debate. So I would like to introduce you to tonight's moderator, Kayla Block, the Campus Sustainability Manager at SFU's Office of Sustainability. Kayla has called Vancouver home for 6 years and has worked in corporate, nonprofit, and higher education sustainability across Canada. She currently oversees the campus sustainability portfolio at SFU's Sustainability Office, where she works across all 3 campuses to implement and scale sustainable decisions and practices. She brings a lot of expertise on how organizations, governments, companies, and individuals can inspire and implement positive change. And we're very lucky to have her as a moderator. She's going to be serious about keeping people to time tonight. So come on up.
Fantastic. Thank you, Janet, for that very kind introduction. And thank you so much, Stacy, for organizing this event as well, and also to Chief Janet George for that fantastic land acknowledgement. So I have been sitting here in the front row, and I know that the announcement on the moderator tonight came a little bit late. It wasn't too long ago, a couple of days ago, actually. And so as I've been sitting here in the front row, I've actually been wondering if we're going to get a surprise visit from Greta Thunberg. She might actually just come through the back door there, but alas, she's not here. I'm going to be here tonight moderating. I'm so excited and honored to be here. This is a really important conversation that we're going to have tonight. And as Janet mentioned, there's over 100 happening across the country. We know that this is a crucial step in moving forward to create change that Canadians want and need. I also want to say hello and welcome everyone who's watching us on Facebook Live tonight. We do encourage you to leave questions and comments, and we will try to incorporate those into the Q&A. So tonight is going to be a wonderful discussion, and my role really as the moderator is to ensure that the discussion moves smoothly and on time, but I also really want to ensure that the audience, everyone here, feels represented because ultimately we are here for you. Before we get started, I do want to go over a couple of community ground rules, and this really is to ensure that this event is safe and inclusive for everyone. Firstly, there will be absolutely no tolerance for hate speech or personal attacks on any of the candidates or any other participants or anything really in that general area. In order to have productive conversations and a healthy democracy, respect for one another is absolutely essential. Secondly, we do anticipate some disagreement, and we know that's inevitable. Healthy discourse is encouraged, but our debate is highly structured for discussions between candidates and between the audience. Various forms of protest will not be permitted to ensure that everyone has a chance to hear from the candidates and their positions. And we have a lot of stuff to cover tonight. It's in a very packed schedule. We've made a really concerted effort to make sure that we hear equally from all the candidates. So just so you're aware of that. And lastly, I know that the topics that we're discussing tonight are quite serious, but we also do want to have some fun and make sure that everyone here leaves with some takeaways. So can I please just get a hands up to make sure, thumbs up, are we all on board with these community rules? Does this make sense? We're going to have a good time tonight. Great. So just a little bit of housekeeping. If you need to use the washrooms, by all means, there are gender-neutral washrooms located just down the hall and to the left near the elevators. Okay, we've got that out of the way. We're ready to get into it tonight. I'm going to welcome the debaters to the stage. So let's start with Jessie Brown, representing the Green Party of Canada. Please come up. Dr. Hedy Fry from the Liberal Party of Canada. Louise Kuhn from the People's Party of Canada, and Brina Lett from the NDP. Just as we're settling in, I should also mention that we did extend an invitation to David Cavey tonight of the Conservative Party, but he said he was not able to make it. And we also have an independent candidate sitting in the back here. His name is Imtaz Popat, so welcome. Thank you. Okay, candidates, let's get on to the debate. So I'd like to go over kind of the rules engagement and how the process is going to work tonight. So each of you will have an opportunity to do a 2-minute introduction. I'd like you to introduce yourself and let us know what your vision for the environment is. Following that, there will be 3 series of questions. We're going to start with 4 questions, which are the standard questions that are being asked across the entire country tonight from 100 Debates on the Environment. I will direct a question to each of you. You will have 90 seconds to answer. And then the remaining candidates will have 1 minute to make a response. You'll see here in the front row, when their time is up, there'll be a red sign that's raised, and please conclude immediately. There will be no warning up to the 90 seconds. Following that section, I will pose 4 questions from community groups. Again, it's going to be the same format, so it'll be directed to each of you. You'll have 90 seconds to respond, and then the remaining candidates will have 1 minute to answer. Lastly, we're going to get on to our lightning round. This is the fun part. So we're going to draw questions from our fantastic audience. And some of these will be directed to specific candidates. If they aren't, I will choose who they go to. And for this round, you'll have 1 minute to respond and then an opportunity for 30 seconds to make another response. Okay, audience, I did speak to some of you when you arrived, but you've been given a slip of paper. So please use that to write down your questions. We'll be collecting these after the first round. It'll be very clear, I'll let you know. So tap into your inner Greta and get thinking. And just so you're also aware, we'll wrap it up at the end with 1 question, and you'll have a minute to respond to that as well. So just as we had some community rules for the audience, there are also some community rules for you folks as well. I will definitely be calling you to task if you speak over your time limit. If you bring up a totally new topic in your response, I'll also call you to task as well. If you're behaving aggressively or inappropriate or disrespectful. Bottom line, I cannot maintain this debate. I have to be fair, and to do that, I have to be very firm. You'll know I'm cutting you off when I start to say thank you, please move on. And lastly, I remind you that maintaining a productive and respectful environment, please respect your other candidates and try not to speak over them. We want to keep this very civilized, and I'm sure you will. Okay, with that, we're ready to begin. So we're going to start in alphabetical order for the opening introductions. Jesse Brown, I'll toss it to you.
Well, thank you so much for having me and for hosting this amazing event. It's so important that we are having this debate solely on the environment and the climate crisis we're in, because this is the most important election of our time, because we still have a window period to turn things around. And, on October 21st, if we don't elect the necessary politicians and people to make that happen, that window period is going to close. And, the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change, made it very clear that we can't get above 2 degrees Celsius. And the track that we're on now is going to exceed that. So I'm really proud to stand with a party that has scientifically based policy to keep us below 1.5 degrees Celsius in global warming. And that's Elizabeth May. That's the Green Party. We have a plan. It's called Mission Possible. It's not going to be easy, but it is possible to do it. So please consider voting green, because we are the only ones with a scientifically based plan. I'm a stepfather of 2 young girls, Ilya and Asia, and I'm concerned about their future. And I want them to live in a planet where they don't have to clean up the mess that our generation has left them. I want them to live in a planet that's healthy and that's safe for them. And this is the future that we can have, but it just takes the political willpower to do it. We don't need to be subsidizing oil and gas companies anymore. It's time to move on from that, and we can do it. And so, I think it's time that we all stand in solidarity. There was 7 million young people marching on September 27th, and we need to listen to them, and we need to act. And so I'm really glad again to be here today. And is my time? Sorry, there's another time.
It's almost there.
Okay, hey, thank you again, Jesse Brown.
Thank you very much, Jesse. Great. Dr. Fry, the stage is yours.
Thank you. I'm just going to have to keep my eye there, right, and not on you. Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Hetty Fry, and I am the longest sitting female member of Parliament in Canadian history. I have served this riding and the people in Vancouver Centre for 26 years. You know me, you know you can trust me, you know that what I say, that I stand on principle. I have been known to stand up to my party when I believed that my party wasn't doing the right thing. So with that, I must tell you that Jesse's right. I think we're all here today because this is an important debate. This debate is about the future, not just for Jesse's kids, but for my grandkids. I have 4 of them. And I think it's really important for me that what we do is to recognize that we have made major mistakes. We have left a mess. And it is up to us to do the most important things that we can. 1, we've got to prevent further degradation of the environment. 2, we've got to look at remediation, how we fix all the things that we have done that have created the problem that we're in. And thirdly, we've got to try and develop humans and species that are resilient to further damage to this climate, whether we create it or anything else creates it. So that is my vision. My vision is a place where there's clean water, clean air, the ability for people to eat food, the ability for species to thrive and to live, whether it's in our marine environment, our land environment, to be able to create a world that our children can live. We had a great life when I was young. We had a great world. And we have, as I will say, as a politician, that we did not pay attention to what was going on. And so now it is up to us to do something about it. And so that is my role. That is what my party wants to do. And I am ready to start rolling up my sleeves and working with you for us to do those 3 things: to prevent, to remediate, and to also create resilience for any future problems this planet will have. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fry. Great. Louise Kearns, please.
Hi, my name is Louise Kearns. I am originally from Montreal, where I was raised. I had the benefit of going to McGill University, and I got an excellent education and graduated with a degree in economics and industrial relations. I have raised 3 children, and my husband and I have been in business together for more than 20 years, and I know the pains and successes that small entrepreneurs face. I have spent most of my life leading not-for-profits for the benefit of the community. I've raised my 3 children not to be afraid, but to take action and to be respectful of the environment. I was raised that way. As a child, I remember driving in the United States and noticing the massive amount of garbage that always was on the side of their highways and did not appear on the side of Canadian highways. Canadians have always treated the environment kindly and have done their best. There is more for us to do. That is for sure. In 100 years, we've gone from wood to oil and gas. That has evolved. We've gone from 2 billion people to 7.7 billion people on the planet. We have evolved. There is a lot more to come. It's not going to happen overnight. We have to gradually move into it. It's going to be entrepreneurs, engineers, inventors who are going to make the changes that are coming forward for us. And I am looking forward to a very bright future for my children, my grandchildren, and my great-grandchildren. I am not afraid. I am not filled with anxiety. I know that we can move forward. I will say we have a government crisis. We have left our children with an incredible debt. And that is something I think that needs to be addressed more urgently than anything else in this country. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Louise. Breen, Roulette, please.
Everyone in this room knows that we are in a climate crisis and on the brink of a climate emergency. And my vision for the Government of Canada is accountability. So we have to start with the parties. We know what the Conservatives plan to do. They've shown us. We know what the Liberals plan to do. Trudeau bought a pipeline. And our MP sent a letter to one of her constituents earlier this year, and in it, she stated, in the last year, the number of constituents opposed to the pipeline has decreased considerably, and that was the basis for which she gave her support to Trans Mountain Pipeline. I don't think that's accurate about this riding. What about the Green Party of Canada? If you've been following the media, Elizabeth May has been telling us for months that she wants to massively upgrade oil refineries in Canada so that we can process bitumen for our domestic oil supply. She wants to use Alberta's tar sands to provide oil supply all across our country. It's been reported as recently as September 20th in the Globe and Mail. Why would she do this? Quebec's Green Party leader, Alex Tyrrell, has spoken out against her plan. He said it was a very dirty process, that we should be shutting down the tar sands as quickly as possible, and that the Greens of Canada were making a huge mistake. On the other hand, Andrew Scheer and Jason Kenney have both endorsed the plan. Then we come to the NDP. We will aggressively promote renewable industry development and research while creating over 300,000 green jobs in our first term. We're committed to protecting the environment and Canada. Thank you.
Thank you, Breen. Fantastic. Okay, that includes the first round of the debate. We're now going to move on to the 4 questions, again reminding you that all of these questions are being asked across the country tonight to every candidate participating in this debate. Candidates, please, we really would like you to focus on what you as an individual MP would do to solve these environmental challenges. We're really interested in you going on beyond stating what your party has done or will do. And in your initial response, we ask that you avoid talking about what other parties are or aren't doing. Let's start with the first question. This one is about climate change. And as the incumbent, Dr. Fry, you can field this one first. And then for responses, we'll go to the left of Dr. Fry. We know that around the world, we are seeing inspiring examples of leadership to reduce greenhouse gas pollution and accelerate the shift to a green economy. However, at the same time, we are seeing the ramp up of the effects of climate change. The scientific consensus is that we have little more than a decade to turn things around. We see extreme weather events across the country, and particularly here in British Columbia, including wildfires, flooding, and droughts. These impacts are causing anxiety and worry given their enormous financial and environmental impact. Per person, Canadians produce the most greenhouse gas pollution of all G20 industrialized nations, nearly 3 times the G20 average, and over 20 tons per person. Here's the question. What are the key elements of an action plan that you will advocate for to ensure that Canada meets its international obligations to reduce greenhouse gas pollution? Dr. Fry.
Thank you very much. I think I look at this, you wanted to know what as an individual MP I would do. I look at this from my position as a physician. The first thing you try to do is you try to prevent any further damage, any further escalation. You try to remediate. In other words, you try to fix the things that have already gone wrong so that you can get it on a stable footing. And then you look at resilience. You look at ways in which this cannot occur again. You look at ways in which people and species can actually come up to be strong enough to withstand changes that would continue to occur. And so for us, the things that we've been doing in the last 4 years as a Liberal Party are very clear. And that is one of the reasons that I have decided that I support what my party is doing.
And what are those actions specifically?
Those big
Please,
the
get to the
4
point.
actions are simply this. Again, we have looked at how we continue to build and move from a high carbon economy to a low carbon economy. And that means training people to work in a green energy system. We look at how we can clean the oceans, make sure that we create wetlands and marine environments that are safe and secure. When we came in, there was 1% of all our marine and wetlands and land environments that were safe. Now we've moved that to 17%. We intend by 2020 to move it up to 25% and further on. So this is about helping the species as well. We've looked at how we will help people to move from a high to a low carbon economy. We're giving people a buyback on their cars.
And Dr. Fry, how is this going to meet international obligations?
Well, these are going to help to bring down greenhouse gas emissions to meet the international obligations. In fact, we believe that we are going to meet our 2030 obligations
Thank you.
before
Please wrap
that.
up.
And our 2050 on time.
Thank you,
Thank
Dr. Fry. Fantastic. We're going to move on to the responses. There's 1 minute, and we will start to the respondents left. Louise, please.
Greenhouse gas emissions are based on calculations by production accounting. Any net exporter of oil and gas is punished under the Paris Accord. Canada is rich in natural resources that fuel the advancement of the world and mankind. Without our energy, developing countries would suffer. Canada is a sovereign nation from the 1867 British North America Act, and the People's Party of Canada will not give up its sovereignty to any foreign nation or entity. We will decide what we're going to do in Canada. We will move forward with clean energy innovations at a speed that is good for Canadians and good for the world. This is eco-alarmism at its worst. Extreme weather conditions have always happened. We hear about everything that goes on in the world about weather because we have this instantaneous information traveling. Let's remember that with what we have with our energy, we have the lowest infant mortality rate, the longest lifespan, we
That's
have the
time,
highest
Louise.
standard of living.
Thank you. Breen, 1 minute.
As a lawyer, I'd say that we exercised our sovereign right to sign on to those agreements. Now, unfortunately, the Liberals' plan isn't strong enough. We're only on track to meet our 2030 commitments in 200 years. I support the NDP, and so I believe that we need to take a climate leadership position in this country. We need to declare a climate emergency, and we need to put in place ambitious, science-based greenhouse gas reduction targets with a goal to stabilize global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius. We want to shift subsidies for oil and gas to renewable industry and development, research, training, and retraining, because it has to be about people as well as the environment. We want to continue carbon pricing, and we want to make it fair by rolling back the brakes that this Liberal government has given to big polluters. And we want to create an independent climate accountability office to keep our government honest.
Thank you, Breen. Thank you so much. Jesse, 1 minute.
So let's be very clear. The climate plans of every other party fail to meet the emissions reduction targets that are necessary to achieve the 1.5 degree Celsius goal of the Paris Agreement. The Liberals still use Stephen Harper's inadequate 2030 target, and while they have recently promised a net zero target by 2050, they have zero plans to get there. And let's not forget, they bought a pipeline.
Jesse, please refer to what your party will be doing.
So as Greens, we're committed to cutting 60% of emissions by 2030, reaching net zero by 2050. And unlike our opponents, we have science-based plans to do it. Unlike the Liberals, who in 2015 promised to eliminate oil subsidies and in fact increase these subsidies, Greens are fully committed to eliminating the billions in subsidies to the fossil fuel industry. And this includes eliminating the NDP-backed tax credits for the LNG industry and development. We must ban fracking. It risks our environment and it causes adverse public health effects. And we must also cancel the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion projects, which risks our local economy and the environment.
Jesse.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Our next question is about water. Breen Ouellette, you will have the first opportunity to respond to this question. Many Canadians know that our country has the longest coastline in the world. Less well known is that Canada is home to roughly half of the world's lakes and roughly 10% of the world's wetlands. Canada is seeing the impact that industrial development and climate change is having on our precious water resources. For example, we're seeing the reemergence of pollution hotspots like Lake Erie in Ontario. The Insurance Bureau of Canada notes that since the 1970s, there has been a 250% increase in natural disasters, including floods and droughts that are likely related to climate change. Here's the question. What can the federal government do to work with different sectors, like municipalities and farmers, to reduce both water pollution and the risk of flooding events?
The NDP will protect our oceans by ending the Trans Mountain Pipeline extension to prevent the 700% increase in tanker traffic that it will create. The federal NDP also opposes LNG, just for the record. It's the BC NDP that is in favor of LNG. The NDP will reduce emissions from shipping and fishing, prevent ocean acidification, and preserve ocean biodiversity by expanding marine protected areas. We will recognize Canadians' right to a healthy environment by creating a federal environmental bill of rights to make sure that everyone can enjoy clean water, air, and land. Environmental rights are a human right. We'll create a national freshwater strategy, work with the provinces and territories to protect waterways, and we'll restore navigable water protections that the Conservatives gutted and still haven't been restored. And we want to work with to connect communities to farmers through local food hubs, develop a national food waste strategy, and partner with farmers to ensure our crop and livestock practices support biodiversity rather than threatening it, including threatening our water supply. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Jesse?
I want to first address the fact that we still have a drinking water and boil water advisory in many communities across Canada, and this is completely unacceptable. And so my first priority is to finish what the Liberals failed to do. We must invest and upgrade in critical infrastructure to ensure safe water and access in every community. Next, we must expand the scope of the Canada Infrastructure Bank to focus on climate-proofing essential infrastructures to protect against flooding and contamination. Unlike the Liberals and NDP, we firmly believe that we must ban fracking. As we all know, it has adverse impacts on our groundwater quality. And we need to support our local municipalities. We need to normalize the deployment of reserve personnel to help protect our communities from extreme climate-related flooding and storms. We can also support municipalities by allocating 1% of the GST to municipal infrastructure projects, and this will provide a consistent baseline of funding. Working with farmers through a renewed National Environmental Farm Plan, we can protect water quality in streams, lakes, and aquifers. Thank you.
Thank you, Jesse. Dr. Fry, please.
Thank you. As I said before, sorry, my allergies give me trouble at this time of year, and I get to the point where I have this laryngitis. I'm sorry. One of the things that we plan to do is to look at how we remediate what's going on now. I mean, we have about 25% of the Earth's water, fresh water especially, and we have, of course, the largest boreal forest. But one of the things we want to do is to make sure that we start preserving our wetlands and our oceans. And one of the first things we've done is to bring that from 1% when the Conservatives left and we came in 2015. In the last 4 years, we've moved up to 17% protection of our water and our wetlands and our oceans to remediate it. And we've put a fair amount of money and effort into doing that. We will work with municipalities and urban areas to look at how we plant trees and how we conserve water in a manner in which we do it in partnership. And we've already started working with municipalities and provinces to get that moving forward. I think we hope that by 2025, we will have preserved 25% of our wetlands and our water and be able to keep them clean and for the future. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Fry. Louise, please.
Canada has 3 coasts and is known as the land of the lakes, and we have lots of water, lots of fresh water. In the last 100 years, as our population grew, we started developing closer and closer to our shorelines for its beauty. We didn't build there 100 years ago because there was seasonal flooding, but now we're doing this. Quebec has been dealing with the seasonal flooding issue now by buying back the land that people built on and declaring them as wetlands so that people are not continuously being flooded out. But this is a provincial issue. Farms that border shorelines have changed or increased their production of grain and produce to animal farming. Animals, through their waste, contaminate the groundwater, contaminate the flows of the rivers or the lakes that they are beside. Not all farming is the same, and we need to control land use, especially on our shorelines, to protect our fresh water. False Creek is a sewer. It's unswimmable half of this past summer. Extreme levels of E. coli contamination need to be fixed now. Again, this is Vancouver's environmental crisis. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. We're now going to move to a question about wilderness conservation. Jesse Brown, you'll have the first opportunity to answer this one. When Canadians are asked what they love most about our beautiful country, they often point to natural beauty, wildlife, and spectacular wilderness areas. And I'm not just talking about here in British Columbia. Yet we are falling far below our international commitments to protect these areas and to protect species, our parks, and other protected areas. These spaces are also underfunded, and they don't have the level of funding they need to conserve the diverse ecosystems that thrive there. A recent study shows that 50% of Canadians, 50% of wildlife species are in decline. We know that 87% of Canadians value the emotional and physical benefits of spending time in nature. However, 82% say that they're concerned that future generations won't have easy access to nature. Here's the question. What will you do to protect the quantity and quality of wilderness in Canada?
So I'm often very shocked by how many animal and plant species are currently on federal and provincial lists of species at risk of extinction, and how many more are added every year. It's no secret that the most common cause of their decline is the destruction of habitat due to economic activity. In 2012, the Harper government gutted the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act. In 2016, the Liberals established an independent expert panel on environmental assessment, which made recommendations on how to improve the Act. However, too many of these recommendations have been ignored. We must fully restore and strengthen the Act and adopt the recommendations of the Commission. We must increase funding to federal departments to dramatically ramp up development and implementation of endangered species recovery plans. By 2030, we must protect a minimum of 30% of freshwaters, oceans, and land. And through increased funding to Parks Canada, we can ensure that the ecological integrity of our national parks are maintained. We need to protect our orcas from Trudeau's pipeline, and we need to protect our caribou up north from NDP's LNG mega expansion project. Thank you.
Great. 1 minute response, Dr. Fry.
I think here's the thing. One of the important things that we know is that there is remediation possible, and one of the things we understand is resilience. And we know that if we start investing in nature, using nature as its own protection against greenhouse gas emissions, for instance, and this would come from looking at how we plant more trees. We have a plan to plant 3 billion more trees. This was obviously maintain water supplies on the land, and it will also be the breathing, the lungs of the world. It will remove a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. We're going to be working with cities to create urban forests, like Stanley Park is an urban forest, and to be able to look at science that will help us to buy plants and grow forests that are biodiversible. With biodiversity. So
and what will you do aside from planting trees?
Pardon?
What additionally will you do aside from the trees?
From the trees, well, working with them to be building trees, but we've also started to create protected areas, marine protected areas. We started with 1% in 4 years. We've had 17%, and we want to move to 25% within the next 5 years.
Thank you. Great. I'll move on to Louise, please. 1 minute.
Our current program of protection of federal land definitely needs to be expanded. We need to be reinvesting in our national parks. This is what people use. This is how people vacation. This is what people enjoy about Canada, foreigners as well as Canadians. Working with industry leaders of natural resources, we need to find real and concrete actions to protect our Canadian wilderness, which is reforestation, taking care of what's there, not cutting down the 200-300-year-old trees that we already have. Stanley Park is a beautiful example in Vancouver Centre. It's a tribute to Vancouver and to Canada, like Central Park is to New York City. The wilderness in Vancouver is right there. Pedestrians can just walk right up and be in the middle of the woods. But it's a municipal issue, and we need to exercise some of that pressure on the municipality to be planting trees. We see more and more of them cut down every day to have another vertical high-rise put up, and there's less and less grassland. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Breen?
We're really very incredibly lucky to live in such a beautiful country. And I think we all want to ensure that our children and grandchildren have the same opportunity. So over 1 million species around the world are facing extinction. And we know that experts are calling for a tripling of the amount of protected land and water in Canada by 2030. Right now, around 10% is protected. We need 30%. The 17% conservation target of the Liberals is simply not sufficient. The new Democratic Party wants to protect 30% of the land in Canada and the freshwater and the oceans by 2030. And we want to back those funding with enforcement, with funding and enforcement, and also with a climate office to conduct regular audits to keep the government accountable.
Thank you. Great. We're now going to turn to pollution and toxic substances. This is the last question for this round. Luis, you'll be the first to respond to this one. So Canada has made big strides to improve our health and environment by regulating toxic substances. Legal limits on lead in gasoline, restricting chemicals like DDT and ozone-depleting substances, the Canada-US Acid Rain Agreement, and the phase-out of coal-fired electricity have had enormous impacts on our well-being by saving lives, preventing illness, and saving billions of dollars in avoided healthcare costs. However, our air pollution is still a leading cause of death and illness in Canada. In addition, our laws and regulations have not kept pace with emerging threats from newer toxic substances in our environment, including pesticides in our food and other harmful chemicals in consumer products. Many of these substances have significant health effects, and these effects are often more severe for children and other vulnerable populations. Our overarching toxics law, the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, has not been significantly strengthened in 20 years. Here's the question. What will you do to ensure that Canadians are better protected from the health and environmental impacts of toxic substances? And will you commit to strengthening the Canadian Environmental Protection Act and the Pest Control Products Act? Louise?
Okay, we need to keep working with the food scientists and product scientists. We need to keep working to make sure that producers and importers keep improving the safety of the quality of our food and the goods that we use. Remember, in the last 100 years, we have achieved the lowest infant mortality rate and the longest lifespan. We're clearly doing something right. As we legislate the removal of harmful chemicals out of our food, scientists develop absolutely new ones. So we have to keep innovating. We have to keep the scientists looking. We have to keep them funded so that they can keep an eye on all of these things. I think we need to be more vigilant on imports from countries with very low standards. We've found that they've misrepresented their products and it has been harmful to Canadians. Remember, Canada is still a free country. We
Louise,
regulate.
Please also refer to the acts as well. We'd like to hear about those. What you'll do to commit to strengthening the Environmental Protection Act.
Well, I think we need to keep the scientists working. We need to keep them funded in order to keep developing what's going on in our environment. Thank you.
Great. Breen, you're next.
The point of environmental protection law is to prevent harm to the environment and to people. And if we're not doing both, then we're not doing enough. And it's true that our laws aren't keeping pace with changes in the industry because the law hasn't been significantly updated since 1999, despite the fact that it's reviewed every 5 years. And Canadians are still being exposed to not new substances, but common substances like BPA and countless consumer products like water bottles and cans.
And what will you do to protect them?
So we need to strengthen the Canadian Environmental Protection Act and other legislation, and we need to reduce the substances in common plastic products, and we need to ban single-use plastics across the board in this country.
Great, thank you. Jesse?
Well, we have made great strides in environmental protection. We haven't come far enough. And we need to update our laws and pass legislation to give Canadians a right to a healthy environment. We must also strengthen the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, and we have included that in our platform. It's obvious to us that we must shift away from using toxic chemicals that affect our public health and environment. It starts with setting targets for reducing the use of pesticides in our agriculture. And many provinces and major cities across Canada have already banned them, and scientists have urged Trudeau to ban them. However, he's failed to act on that regard. We also need to create an adverse effects reporting database for doctors and emergency rooms to keep track of the health impact of pesticides and other chemicals. And through collaboration and support with our farmers, we can transition our farming industry to be rooted in organic and regenerative farming practices. Thank you.
Thank you, Jesse. Dr. Fry?
Thank you. I think that one of the things we have to do is to look at the fact that so many young kids today are getting asthma and we are seeing illnesses that we know are environmentally related. So I think it's important for us to strengthen the Environmental Protection Act, and we will move to do that. But one of the important things that we need to think about again is how do we look at pesticides? We work with municipalities, we have been, to bring down, change pesticide regulations in municipalities across this country because they're the ones who have those regulations. And we need to look at, again, and I keep going back to this, how do we make sure that we absorb all that carbon and greenhouse gas emissions that's coming down? And by, again, planting trees sounds like a ridiculous thing to say, but it isn't. And we need to look at how carbon sinks occur
This
where
doesn't
we
have
use
to do with
wetlands
toxic
to absorb the,
substances, yeah.
the carbon and be able to create a healthy environment for our kids to breathe the air that they breathe and to live in. And retrofitting homes is one way, of course, of getting healthy environments for children to live in. If we have clean energy in the homes, we have begun to phase out coal. It's almost phased out across this country.
Time. Thank you. Great. Okay, fantastic. That concludes our first round of questions. Before we turn to the questions from the community audience, it's your time to shine. So please think about what you want to ask your candidates and write them down on the cards that were provided. Make sure it's legible. And volunteers are going to come by to pick them up whenever you're ready. And what I'd like you to do is pass them down the aisles to the middle, and the volunteers will come down the middle to fetch them. If you want to address your question to a specific candidate, please make sure you indicate that on there. And anyone who is watching live on Facebook, we're watching for your comments as well, so please include them. We're going to move on to the next set of questions. And these questions are coming from community groups. So I'm going to pose these questions in the reverse order from the last round. So we're going to start with Louise, then we're going to go to Jesse, Breen, and then Dr. Fry. Again, candidates, you'll have 90 seconds to respond, and then there will be an opportunity for an additional response after that, 1 minute, and then we'll move around to the left. Louise, we're going to start with you. This question comes from the False Creek Residents Association. They say that False Creek, a federal waterway, is so polluted that it played a major factor in Sunset Beach being closed over the summer months due to high E. coli counts. What can be done to remediate and clean the False Creek waterway?
False Creek, my particular favorite topic. I live right there. Anybody who lives in Vancouver Centre is affected, lives, walks over, drives over, sees False Creek almost every single day. It is a sewer. You see that there are people who are living on their boats most of the summer, and it's been found that most of them don't visit the free sewage dumping sites.
And what will you do to remediate False Creek?
I would like to have you would have to be permitted if you want to park your boat in the middle of False Creek in the the far east side, so that they can keep track of how many boats are there and they can control that they do have their sewage dumped. It is clear that somewhere along the way that there is actual city sewage from buildings possibly that is being dumped right in the water. The E. coli levels are so high, and it's not after a rain. If we knew how dry and beautiful our summer was, there was no rainwater that washed all of this garbage into the creek. This is a municipal, a provincial, and a federal problem. We need to all get together, and I think it needs to start from the top. And the federal government needs to be the champion for False Creek. Our Sunset Beach is something that is known around the world as a beautiful beach, except most of us who live around here wouldn't go into it because we'd be afraid of the bacteria through most of the summer. So this is wrong for something that we have right here around us.
Thank you, Louise. Great. Breen?
The NDP wants to divert oil subsidies to invest in renewable energy and clean energy industries. And one of those industries that we need to promote in Canada is industry to clean our water. It's dirty. We need to be able to clean it in many different ways, in many different places, not just False Creek.
And how will you do that?
By investing money in what are known as scale-ups, which is when you take startups and you put them on a 3-year plan of investment to grow at a rate of 20% per year. It's a really powerful way to take a fledgling industry like environment and supercharge it in Canada, making us a world leader. And we need to be looking at scale-ups for water.
Thank you, Breen. Jesse?
It's a great question because I was actually on Granville Island yesterday and I was speaking with a couple and they agree with you, Louise. They think that the water is being contaminated by another source other than the boats that are just there parked. And I know that there's federal jurisdiction over the water and because it's a waterway, but Canada, the federal government has a partnership with the city of Vancouver on Granville Island. So we can work with the city to figure out what is going into the water to make it so high in E. coli counts. We also want to protect Falls Creek from the risk of a devastating oil spill from hundreds of new oil tankers going through Burrard Inlet and English Bay. There was the effects of a fuel spill that are still being felt just a couple years ago, and the city hasn't renewed or recouped its costs from that. So imagine what it would be like if one of these oil tankers spilled and going into Falls Creek. So as Greens, we want to work across party lines and all government to clean up Falls Creek for sure.
Thank you. Dr. Fry?
Thank you. I think one of the important things that Breen just pointed out is that even though the federal government owns most of Granville Island and that area, that we have a partnership with the city of Vancouver to do that. All kinds of regulations that have to be made with regard to sewage dumping, with regard to a good sewage system, et cetera, comes out of that kind of partnership. Now, the federal government has an infrastructure plan in which we're helping with sewage disposal, with the ability to create better sewage and water remediation systems, and we're working with the city of Vancouver to do that. So there is a partnership here. The federal government can't do this alone. We have to work with provinces and cities. And so it's very important that we recognize that that partnership has to exist, that we have to work closely. We're putting money into startups, which is what Breen is saying. We're not going to do it, we've begun to do it. For the last 3 years, we have been putting money into technology that would look at clean water, that would look at oil spills, that would look at ways of sopping up oil if it comes out. So there are a whole lot of technology and green energy that we've been spending money on already. I think we've already worked with 300 companies to do this kind of work.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Fry. Fantastic. So volunteers, if you haven't already, will you please pick up the slips from the center aisle? That perhaps has already happened. Fantastic. Great. So we're going to move on to the next question. Jesse, this one will be directed to you. This question has been adapted and written originally by the independent advocacy group Lead Now, and we thought it was just too good to leave out or leave to the audience to ask. So they ask, the climate crisis disproportionately impacts poor and marginalized communities. Meanwhile, billionaires and corporations exploit unfair tax loopholes and hide wealth away in offshore tax havens. Here's the question. To what extent do you see climate change and inequality as interconnected crises? And what policies do you personally support that would work to tackle both of these issues?
That is a great question. And yeah, I think the climate crisis and environmental justice is social justice. They're very tied together. We need to be doing more to balance out the inequity that the climate crisis is having, because we're starting to feel it now here in British Columbia with the smoke and with some more stormy seasons and floods back east. But in some countries, like in Bangladesh, it's a terrible, terrible situation where floods there are causing.
Jesse, what policies do you support?
Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
We're going to go after offshore tax evaders. That's a Green Party policy. Raise the corporate tax to 21% so that these billionaires' shareholders are paying their fair share so that we can invest that in renewables. And we fully supporting other countries in their efforts to reduce climate crises in their own countries.
Great, thank you. Dr. Fry.
Thank you. I think those are two questions, and they are linked, but indeed the two questions should be tackled separately. How do you go after offshore money, and how do you go after people who avoid paying taxes? And we have started to do that work right now, working with provinces in terms of money laundering, et cetera, and also getting Canada Revenue Agency the money that it needs to do the kind of in-depth research we can to find out where that money is coming from, to follow the money and to be able to tax it properly. But the most important thing that we're talking about here is the fact that poverty and inequity, globally, inequity, we see what's happening in the Amazon, we see what's happening to the forests of the world, we see the drought in the world, and we have to invest in helping internationally and ramping up our international aid to help to equalize this, to help people out of poverty and drought, climate change, and civil strife that's getting them on the move, an inability to live, an inability to belong, an inability to build futures. That's an important part of foreign policy that we have already stood up to the bar and increased every time the amount of money we're spending on foreign aid.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Fry. Louise, please.
Again, I find that a complex question, but if you're talking about the environment and lifting people out of poverty with it, or with the environment, cutting off oil and gas is not going to help developing countries. They still need that product in order to rise out of the poverty that they are in. Giving foreign aid to countries where the money that we give the higher ups, the government, and it never trickles down properly to the people that it's supposed to go to, is not helping foreign aid.
Louise,
That
what
is just
policies
throwing.
do you support?
I would like to cut back foreign aid because the money is not going to the people that it's supposed to help. That's exactly what the People's Party of Canada wants to do. We need to cut that back and first help the people who are in third world conditions in our own country on East Hastings Street, just a couple of blocks over. Those people are living in third world conditions. They need to be raised up out of poverty, sickness, drug addiction. That is where Canadians need to start helping. That is what we have to start. That is our first stop. That's the crisis.
Thank you. Breen.
I believe that the climate crisis and social inequality are connected. And I think that part of the reason that has occurred is because if you look at poverty and wealth over time, you see that the gap is increasing. And we know that we need to tax our billionaire class, and we need to tax multimillionaires who are getting away with not paying their fair share, and that impacts on climate. The other side of it, as some of you know, I'm a Métis person, and as an Indigenous person, I know that, and as a lawyer, I know that the standard in Canada is duty to consult, which means if a project's going to impact on an Indigenous nation, they need to be asked for a little while, and then we just go ahead with it. The NDP supports full, prior, informed consent from Indigenous nations on every project in Canada that affects them.
Thank you, Breen. Breen, this question will be for you to field first. So we know that the natural resources industries are significant drivers of the Canadian economy and are also major employers in this country. How will you ensure that a transition to a low carbon economy is equitable and does not leave behind marginalized communities? You get 90 seconds. 90 seconds, yep. You're welcome.
The NDP is a party for people. And so when we talk about addressing climate change, we talk about doing it in the scope of ensuring that the people who are in fading industries have somewhere to go. And we know that we've got subsidization of oil and gas in this country, and it's to the tune of billions of dollars every year directly. And then additionally, we have other billions of dollars that are going to subsidization. The NDP wants to take subsidization of oil and gas and other corporate welfare, and we want to invest it in renewable industry and job training and retraining. We need to make sure that people have someplace to go.
And what will you do about marginalized communities to ensure they're not left behind while doing that?
Okay, and to address marginalized communities while doing that, we need to also look at the poverty side of the equation. And the NDP has a plan to address poverty by promoting social and co-op housing in this country so that affordability is it reaches better levels in Canada.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Breen. Jesse, you're the first to respond to this one.
So we can't achieve climate security in the absence, excuse me, we can't achieve climate security in the absence of equity. And we're committed to establishing a $300 million dedicated, comprehensive, inclusive, and flexible just transition funding program for those working in fossil fuel industries. This includes training and education assistance, We're also committed to establishing a Canadian Sustainable Generations Fund to make critical investments in trades, apprenticeships, and education required for the transition to a green economy. However, many of the trades and skills learned and used through the fossil fuel industry are transferable to clean tech, renewable energy, and construction industries. With our commitment to transition to 100% renewable energy by 2030, we will create thousands of new jobs for Canadians working in Alberta's energy industry. And on your point of marginalized communities, I'm really proud to be with a party that's going to have guaranteed livable income for all Canadians. It's an exciting platform piece that we have paid for by increasing corporate taxes on the ultra-rich.
Thank you, Jesse. Dr. Fry?
Thank you. I think we have started a poverty remediation strategy already. Looking at the marginalized communities in Canada, they're not just Indigenous peoples, but Indigenous peoples make up a huge part of that. But they're seniors. They are low-income families who cannot afford to bring up their children. So we lowered the rate of the middle class in terms of their taxes, and we increased it on the 1%. That was the first thing we did on the people who make over $200,000 and more. What that did was it allowed us to give a lot of families with children the money to help them. Each month, I know of a constituent who told me she waits for her $800 a month tax-free to help her. However, we also need to look at skills and training. We need to look at communities like Indigenous communities who live in resource-rich areas and need to develop their resources. And how we train those young people. We have a fund that we've started to work with Indigenous communities to train young Indigenous people with the skilling. In the low carbon economy, the same thing. We have started programs in which we are reskilling people who work in high carbon economies to be able to work in low energy systems and low energy economies.
Thank you.
The People's Party of Canada has a plan to help people who have more difficulty by basically lowering taxes, letting you keep more money in your pocket, having a system where the business tax is lower, so the incentive on the private sector is to expand, to innovate, to hire. This is how people get moving. People get jobs, they're able to rise up out of poverty. The ones who can't do it that easily, we need to go in there and help them. We need to help the ones who are with the opioid crisis.
Louise, related to a low carbon economy, please.
To a low carbon economy. Well, I mean, Justin Trudeau had no business buying the pipeline. We should have started by just putting through the pipeline, because that pipeline would have elevated the standard of living for many Indigenous people in the north of British Columbia. They all wanted this pipeline to go through. There was a handful of tribes that did not want them. You can laugh, but that's fine. This is a discussion. This is called freedom of speech.
Thank you, Louise. Great. Okay, Dr. Fry, you're going to have the last crack at the final question for this round. So this is another question that's adapted from Lead Now. Many people, including prominent scientists and voters, agree that Canadian governments need to do more on the climate emergency. What are the barriers to taking the action that we need, and how do you plan to overcome them if elected into office? 90 seconds.
I agree. Governments haven't been doing enough. We were kind of late to the table, but we're there now. And I think one of the things we need to do is to shift as quickly as we possibly can from a high to a low carbon economy. Phasing out coal is one of them, but the other one is helping people in Alberta right now who have oil sitting there and need to come to market, because hundreds of thousands of jobs depend on that. We're a federal government. We can't throw Albertans under the bus just because we don't like the fact that they get their jobs from an oil economy. So looking at that, helping them and training them in the meantime to move into technologically clean industries is a way that we will deal with that. And so that is how we plan to phase in. We have to phase it in and recognize it must be phased in. But we all commit to greenhouse gas levels by retrofitting our homes, by using less energy, by phasing out single-use plastics. Those are the kinds of things that we're doing, helping to keep our oceans clean, building wetlands and building species at risk, places where they can live safely. Those are kinds of things you have to do concomitantly. You can't do one and wait for the other. You have to keep doing them on a tranche. We have started to do that already for 4 years. We have had great movement forward in terms of all these things we're doing, and we're almost phased out coal. So these are some of the things that you need to do. We cannot just do it in a day. We cannot just do it in 2 years. We have to be able to help ensure that we don't leave anyone behind while we move from this, and we give people the skills and tools and the money they need
Thank
to
you,
create
Dr.
new
Fry.
technologies.
Thank you. Louise, please.
Well, I have to say that your question starts with pretending that it's a statement of fact, and it's actually a statement of opinion, because this is not a climate crisis. We have to move towards cleaner energy. Everybody believes that. But we know that the present government, the Trudeau government, whatever levels they set, they're not achieving them. And they've actually said, we don't mind not achieving them. We're just going to keep pushing the bar forward.
Louise, what are
This
the
is the-
barriers? What are the barriers to the action, to taking action?
Taking action is people have to recognize that we need CO2 emissions. The world grows on it. It comes out of the trees. It comes out of us. It comes out of the ground. This is what we need to be doing. Now, so the statement of fact that this is a climate crisis is not held by all scientists in the world. It's not held by 97% of the scientists. There are many scientists that do not believe that we're in a climate crisis. So making us answer a question as though it's a crisis is kind of, a back-ended way of doing things.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Breen, please.
There are 3 barriers that I can fit into a minute. Taxation levels are a barrier. When the super rich and large corporations are allowed to externalize their costs onto us and not pay their fair share, it has a huge impact on us, and it has a huge impact on the climate. The pipeline is a barrier because it's meant to send bitumen overseas, and we're basically, we've been co-opted into purchasing and subsidizing a Texas-based company so that we can send our bitumen overseas. That's not helping. And accountability is the third piece. And as I've said earlier, we want to set up an independent climate accountability office that is giving direct feedback to Canadians to see how we're achieving our goals. Because right now we're all kind of in the dark. We need the information, and we can get it from an independent source.
Thank you, Breen. Okay, fantastic. We have.
can
I'm
I answer?
sorry,
Yeah,
Jesse.
sorry.
Yes,
Thanks.
please. My apologies.
No
Go right
problem.
ahead.
So I think the biggest barrier is, quite frankly, a lack of political will from our status quo political parties, because we have all the answers. We know how to transition to a fossil fuel-free economy. We're just not doing it. We have some of the smartest people in the world in Canada. We have the money. And so we just need to get with the program. And with all due respect, Dr. Fry, the climate plan is total hypocrisy. We can't declare a climate emergency one day and then spend billions of dollars on a pipeline and oil tanker expansion project. It's insanity. Everybody knows it. And the Greens, we have a 21-point plan. Check it out, Mission Possible. Go to the Green Party website. It's possible. We can do it. And our window period is closing to do it. So I'll end it there. Thank you.
Thank you. My apologies for skipping you there. Okay, now we've officially ended this round. We're going to move on to the lightning round. So this is the last section of questions. We've covered a lot of ground so far, but this perhaps is the most important part. So I'm going to direct the question to the candidates, and then we'll move around to the left as we've been doing all night for the responses. And just a reminder that there's only a 30-second response following a 1-minute initial response for these questions, okay? Okay, this question is for Jesse. You're going to start. How will you consult Indigenous nations and tribes in a respectful and meaningful way?
Well, as Breen mentioned, there's a duty to consult, and it's what needs to happen, and that's not what's happened with the Trans Mountain Pipeline project. So as the Green Party, we've really committed to working with Indigenous nations, and we're one of the only parties that I think is proposing working with Indigenous groups to get rid of the Indian Act, essentially. And
how will you do that?
To work, well, mostly by listening and to working with them. I mean, it would be looking at all cross provinces, but really, sorry, I'm fumbling here a little bit. I just know that's in the Green Party platform is working to consult and making sure that people have the ability to say no to a project, because right now it's being steamrolled through. I know that I was one of 10,000 British Columbians to march up Burnaby Mountain in solidarity with the Coastal First Nations people
Thank
to say
you,
no to
Jesse.
the Trans Mountain Pipeline project.
Thank you, Jesse. Dr. Fry, 30 seconds.
Thank you. One of the things we have already begun to do, we've accepted the Royal Commission report in all of its recommendations, and we've begun to work on them. Every year now, for the last 3 years, the Prime Minister meets with First Nations on a nation-to-nation basis 3 times a year, in the same way we do with provinces on a federal provincial basis from time to time. We do not accept, and we know very clearly that Indigenous communities are not one amorphous mass. They're very different nations. They're at very different stages in their lives for how they want to move forward. And so to do that, we have to
Thank you,
talk to
Dr.
them
Fry.
about how we do that to suit them.
Thank you. Louise?
The People's Party of Canada's platform is very clear about Indigenous nations. We want to get rid of the Indian Act. We want to give the First Nations people back their land. We're going to have to buy some of it from who owns it now, to return some of this land to the people that it belonged to originally. The Indian Act doesn't work for them, and it doesn't work for Canada.
And how will you consult with them?
Come to the table and you can have your land back. I think that's pretty simple conversation to have.
Thank you. Breen, 30 seconds, please.
There's a lot of talk of what we're going to impose on Indigenous nations. The NDP does not support the duty to consult. It doesn't rise to the necessary level of respect. We need free, prior, informed consent. And Indigenous nations want to come to the table. They're coming to the table all the time. And we need to give them the equal footing to deal with us nation to nation, every individual nation.
Thank you, Breen. Fantastic. Okay, moving on. Breen, you're going to field this question first, please. Okay, given the current positive relationship between the distribution of fossil fuels, mortality and poverty rates, and the importance of fossil fuels to Canada's economy, what is your plan to rapidly shift away from fossil fuels without harming our economy and removing away from the dependence on fossil fuels?
So as I've said earlier, the NDP wants to shift corporate welfare and oil subsidies to promoting the renewable industry, research and development, and job training and retraining in this country. That will give people who are in the oil industry and the natural gas industry and the coal industry a place to transition, a place to go, so that we don't have an impact. And we actually will have a greater impact on jobs because we don't stop there. We also want to retrofit homes and buildings across the country. We want to ensure that we have better ecologically sound buildings so we're not needlessly wasting energy on air conditioning and heating. And that's going to create over 300,000 jobs in Canada in just the first 4 years.
Thank you. Jesse, 30 seconds.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Sure. Okay, so given the current positive relationship between the distribution of fossil fuels and mortality and poverty rates, and the importance of fossil fuels to Canada's economy, what is your plan to rapidly shift away from fossil fuels without harming the economy and those dependent on fossil fuels?
So I mentioned earlier the Green Party has a just transition for Canadian oil workers, which includes creating a $300 million fund to retrain oil and gas workers. We actually think that the transition is going to help the economy, through investing in, like as Breen mentioned, the retrofitting. Yeah, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Dr. Fry?
Thank you. I think one of the ways to do that, we've already started doing this. One of the things we're doing is retrofitting homes already. Many homes have been done by CMHC to be retrofitted. We're looking at how we reskill and retrain people to work in the new economies that are green economies. We're helping to start up companies that are investing in green technology, and that has already also begun. And we're also moving completely away from coal. But getting people back to work, making sure people can work, is one of the biggest pieces that we have to do, and that's retraining and reskilling people.
Thank you, Dr. Fry. Louise?
Fossil fuels have bettered mankind. At this point, it has increased our longevity. Infant mortality rates have gone down, and it's all because of fossil fuel, because of the energy source that it does provide to all countries. We are continuing to innovate. One thing that people don't know, that British Columbia would be one of the prime places to have geothermal, and very few buildings are retrofitted that way. That should be something that should be pushed, because the cold climate that we have here, the abundance of water, that is what we need to be doing.
Thank you. Fantastic. Okay, moving on to the next question. This one will be for you, Dr. Fry. Why has the current government increased oil subsidies? Is there any plans to eliminate them in the near future?
Simple answer, yes, because we're moving away from a high carbon economy into a low carbon economy. But at the moment, there are hundreds of thousands of jobs and people's mortgages and their children who are dependent on these jobs. And so what we're doing is phasing. We're phasing it out. And as we're phasing it out, we have to still get that oil to markets. And this is exactly what we're doing. We're not going to throw Albertans under the bus, because in British Columbia, we feel a certain way about certain things. As a federal government, we're responsible to all Canadians. So that basically is what we're planning to do, to continue to get that oil to market, but meanwhile, phasing out that oil and helping Albertans and people who are dependent on fossil fuels to get new jobs.
Thank you. Louise, 30 seconds.
Any subsidies that are going to the fossil fuel, to oil and gas, is called corporate welfare. And that is something that the People's Party of Canada want to eliminate. They want to make companies stand on their own. And as they eliminate the corporate welfare, that's how we're going to get other industries to be able to enter the market with new innovations, different types of energy, and that is how we're going to advance. We're going to do it that way without crippling the Canadian economy. It's a very simple platform.
Thank you, Louise. Breen?
I've said it several times. The NDP wants to, on day one, take all the oil subsidies and natural gas subsidies and apply them to promoting the renewable industry in Canada. And it's, I can only repeat it so many times. So we need to transition in a way that supports people.
Thank you, Breen. Okay, this is the last question for this round. It's
Just, sorry, one more response.
Oh, sorry,
Yeah,
Jesse.
No, it's okay.
I'm so sorry.
No, it's really fine.
You're so far away. I'm so sorry.
Thanks. One of the ways we can not subsidize the oil and gas industry is by banning fracking up north in northern BC. This is the plan that the NDP and the Liberals are supportive of. There's, I think it was $250 million is being given to LNG Canada for infrastructure grade upgrades there. And it's really wrong. And it's going to increase our carbon emissions immensely. It's not creating jobs in Canada. They're being shipped overseas, and it's impacting our wildlife and our caribou population up there. Northern BC is being destroyed because of these subsidies.
Thank you, Jesse. Okay, this is now the last question for this round. Luis, we're going to start with you for this one. An audience member would like to know, what is your specific plan to deal with polluted water in First Nations communities?
That's a great question. The waste that the communities deal with goes into the ground and it pollutes their water. They need proper drinking water. There have been developments that can bring them potable water, drinking water, special sewage systems that would be able to be adapted to these smaller communities all over the north. These are all Canadians that are living in, again, I won't say quite third world conditions, but if you don't have running water and clean water in your home, that is tough. That's called camping, and some of us only do it for 5 days at a time. Now, these people have been living like that for generations. And unfortunately, the current governments for the past 15 years keep talking about, we're almost there, we've almost fixed it. And these people grow up, have children, grandchildren, they're still living in the same situations. There is the technology to bring up there. It is not expensive. We have the money. We are Canadians. We take care of each other.
Thank you, Louise. Breen?
We need to spend the money on it the same way we do everywhere else. If the federal government won't spend the money to ensure that Indigenous nations have clean water, then we're continuing a system of apartheid in this country. That's what the Indian Act is. It needs to end. 2019 is not an appropriate year to have apartheid in Canada.
Jesse?
So we cannot seriously address the climate crisis without Indigenous leadership, reconciliation, and collaboration. One of the first priorities must be to end all drinking water and boil water advisories. The federal government must increase its investments and accessibility of funding for critical infrastructure to ensure safe water and access in every community.
Thank you, Jesse. Dr. Fry?
This is something the federal government has been doing. When we came in, there were, in every community in the north, there were boil water advisories. We've brought down 3/4 of those boil water advisories now so that those communities have clean water. We still have a little bit to go, but it also means working with the communities to be able to bring in the kind of infrastructure that is needed to get them clean water. And we're on track to get that finished by next year.
Great. Thank you. Okay, that's the end of the lightning round. We're going to finish with one question tonight instead of doing a full wrap up or recap from what you've talked about. So we know that voter turnout in recent elections has not been particularly strong. What message do you, as a candidate for Vancouver Centre, want to deliver to inspire people to get politically engaged? We're going to start with Jesse for this one, please.
So this is our closing?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
1 minute.
So I'm going to keep it real with everyone. We're most likely going to see a minority government situation, and it's probably going to be a liberal minority government situation. So there is the very real possibility that the Greens can hold the balance of power, just like we do in BC, and enact real legislation to reduce our carbon emissions and end our reliance on fossil fuels, because it's possible. We have a plan, it's called Mission Possible, and we can do it. But so this is why Vancouver Centre matters. And we can take a stance on these hundreds of new oil tankers going through our waters. We can let Ottawa know that everyday working people, seniors, youth, people of Vancouver are more important than the profits of multinational corporations. But in order for us to have influence, we need to get rid of some MPs who haven't been doing their job, haven't been representing their constituents, and replace them with hardworking Greens who have policies based in science. And so what about the NDP? Again, they're the party of LNG, they're the party of fracking, they're the party of Site C Dam, and they're the party of Rachel Notley, and we all know how that went.
Thank
so
you.
Please vote Green.
Thank you, Jesse. Dr. Fry.
I was so busy listening to Jesse that I forgot what your question was.
Okay, the question, what do you as the Vancouver Centre candidate want to deliver to inspire people to get politically engaged?
Well, it's a simple answer. If you look around the world right now, we are seeing governments that no longer believe in rule of law, no longer believe in democracy, that are putting people in jail because they don't agree with what their governments are doing. We're watching that happening around the world. It is a very frightening, that's a frightening situation. And we need to remember that we are one of the few democracies in the world that is strong. And we need to get people to recognize that every single vote counts. Jesse's right. In fact, the Greens and the Liberals and the NDP don't have a far different climate policy. The bottom line is who's going to form government. The choice is between the Conservatives and between us. And I tell you, I have sat for 10 years across from Stephen Harper. I do not want to go across from another Conservative government. They destroyed this country. They're going to destroy it even more.
Louise, please.
I find it interesting to listen to obeying the rule of law when our prime minister doesn't obey the rule of law. But let's move on from that. Let's just say that people need to get engaged. And I would like to tell you that at the People's Party of Canada, that has grown in 12 months to be a national party with 93% of ridings with candidates in them, that is a movement. And around the world, there is democracy. And there's a lot of populist parties that are being elected because people are disenchanted with the same old, same old. My comrades here are going to make all kinds of promises. The People's Party of Canada does not make promises they're not holding. It is a very simple platform. Higher taxes, higher taxes, higher taxes, lower taxes. It's a simple platform. Thank you.
Thank you, Louise. Breen, please, 1 minute.
Higher taxes for the super rich, not you. LNG was passed by a BC Green coalition. Yes.
Please continue, Breen. Thank you.
And we got a pipeline. I think that people should be inspired by the NDP because when you read through our 109-page policy document, you see that it's about people. over and over again. It's about people and how do we help people to thrive in this country. The environment is one of those pieces, and we've committed to a very incredible environmental plan that includes accountability. Nobody's talking about accountability. We need to know that what's being said is actually being done. We want to put that in place at the NDP.
Thank you, Breen. Okay, we did it. That is the end of the questions. Just to sort of wrap things up, I have to say that, we started at the beginning of the discussion looking at these higher level, really important environmental issues that we have in this country. And a few things have been quite clear. After those higher level questions, we really tried to funnel down to our communities here in Vancouver Centre. But I think what's very obvious is that voters here are ready. There's momentum and they want political action. I think that's been very clear. And that also this is not a simple and easy topic. There's lots of layers happening. And when you talk about the environment, it's not just the environment, the social and economic pieces come in as well. So with that, I'd like to thank all of you for coming out tonight and taking part in this very important discussion. Just showing up here tonight really indicates that the environment cannot go ignored this federal election. I'd like to thank our candidates this evening, Dr. Fry, Breen Ouellette, Luis Kierans, and Jesse Brown. And a special thanks to our fantastic organizers, Public Square, thank you so much, as well as Stacey Martlow for putting this together. So, I would be totally remiss not to remind you to vote. Please, the advanced polling starts on the 11th, it goes to the 14th, and of course, Election Day is on the 21st. Elections.ca will tell you where your polls are, and you can check out the pop-up station at the back. Thank you so much for coming tonight.